So if you're just now joining us, getting your audio set up and getting settled in, we are here tonight with a really special group of people. We're going to be gathering around and talking about college, the heart and soul of what makes a higher education what it is, and some of the beauty that lies within those opportunities. So our guest tonight will be introduced shortly. And let me go ahead and advance our slide, and you can see our agenda for the evening. Right. Well, I'm Allison Haley. I'm the Culture and Events Coordinator at Scholé Academy. It's a real pleasure to have you with us this evening. I'd like to introduce to you our moderator of this evening, Joelle Hodge. Joelle holds a Bachelor's of Arts in History and Political Science from Messiah University in Grantham, Pennsylvania, and is currently enrolled in the Master of Arts in Teaching program at Eastern University's Templeton Honors College. She began her career as a staffer to the United States Senator Arlene Specter from Pennsylvania, before finding her professional home in the world of classical education in 1999. She has 20 years of classical education teaching experience, and she's co-authored 2 books produced by Classical Academic Press, The Art of Argument, An Introduction to the Informal Fallacies and the Discovery of Deduction, An Introduction to Formal Logic. She continues to support various editorial projects at CAP, and her primary focus is on supporting the growth and development of Classical Academic Press in her role as Vice President of Operations, Sales, and Marketing. So we're really grateful to have you as our moderator this evening. I would like to pass it to you to introduce our panelists.
Sure. Thank you very much, Allison. I hope many of you already know Allison. She has become an invaluable member of the Scholé Academy admin team here. I actually remember interviewing her when she first applied as a mathematics instructor, but since then she's used her gifts and talents to help support the growth and the development of the Scholé community. The work we're doing here together supports the work of so many parents and families, and it's because of our team that we're able to do so much for you. So thank you, Allison. One more quick note of thanks to our fearless leaders, our Scholé Academy Director, Joanne Shinstock. I know she's terribly sorry to miss tonight's event. She's battling the flu, and it's really come on strong. So please be praying for her. Keep her in your prayers this week for sure. So without too much further ado, I'll go ahead and start here interviewing our panelists. I'm honored to call Dr. Kathryn Smith both my friend and my teacher. I am just about finished with my MAT in classical education through the Templeton Honors College. I am definitely on the slow track there, but Kathryn is the co-director of that program, and she's also the assistant professor in classical education at the Templeton Honors College. Prior to joining Eastern, she was a visiting lecturer at the University of Dallas in Texas, and she holds her MA and PhD in literature from UDallas, where she was a Louise Cowan Scholar. And she's taught literature and writing for nearly 20 years at both secondary and post-secondary schools. And she has also directed and assisted in directing several college programs for high school students. So thank you, Kathryn, for being here. And another Dr. Smith, Dr. Matthew Smith, just this year, I had the pleasure of meeting Matthew Smith. He is the founding president of Hildegard College. It is a brand new classical college in Southern California, combining the liberal arts with the study of entrepreneurship. Dr. Smith has 15 years of experience in teaching in higher education at public and private universities, and he writes and speaks frequently on the future of Christian college. He's also a scholar of medieval and Renaissance literature, as he well should be if he's going to be the founder of Hildegard College. And he also edits the academic journal Christianity and Literature. He also serves on the governing board of Veritas Academy and in California, and the Classic Learning Test. Our next panelist is another I am pleased to call a friend. At least once a year, I ask to have lunch with David Diener to hear more about some of the issues on his radar. I know that if David is working on a new project, it's going to have an impact on the renewal of classical education. Dr. Diener works at Hillsdale College, where he is an assistant professor of education. His previous experience includes 15 years in K-12 private education, 11 of those in administration, and 8 as a headmaster of classical Christian schools. He is also, and this is a long list, he is a fellow on the Alcuin Fellowship National Council and director of the Alcuin Fellowship Midwest chapter. He serves on the board of directors for the Society for Classical Learning and the board of academic advisors for the CLT, and he's a member of the National Council of Classical Educators. He's the author of a couple of books, a couple of them published by Classical Academic Press, and he serves as a series editor for the press's series, The Giants in the History of Education. And he's also an associate editor for the journal Principia, a brand new journal on classical education, which you can sign up to receive for free. If you're interested in that, let us know, and we'll make sure you get the information for how to do that. Our last 2 panelists are 2 women I'm excited to get to know better with all of you this evening. Dr. Shannon Valenzuela, I hope I got that right.
Yes.
I've been practicing, is an affiliate assistant professor of humanities at the University of Dallas. She taught in K-12 education for many years and across multiple subject areas, and is also an award-winning screenwriter and novelist, which I want to hear more about sometime. Her recent and forthcoming course offerings include medieval literature, classical pedagogy, classical and Christian epic poetry, teaching drama and epic poetry, and screenwriting. She received her PhD in literature from the University of Notre Dame, where she specialized in the medieval period. And last, but certainly not least, we are welcoming Kimberly Farley, representing the Classic Learning Test. Kimberly is a veteran homeschooling mom and loves talking to students and their families, helping them navigate home education, testing choices, and preparing for college. She is a passionate advocate for connecting students to liberal arts colleges after her children's exceptional experiences at 3 of CLT's partner colleges. So please join me in welcoming this wonderful group to help us have a great conversation this evening, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about in a minute. Before we jump in, I do want to acknowledge that yesterday was the beginning to Advent season, and Advent is all about watching and waiting and making space for the joy of God incarnate to come into our lives, into our world, into our hearts and minds. And I wanted to pray together. I found a short prayer by Richard Newhouse. So if you would pray with me before we get started this evening. Phil, we pray you our every moment with his threefold advent, as then he came and now he comes and will one day come again. Awaken us to then and now and one day of his presence in this present moment. As we put on the Lord Jesus Christ, may all our time be clothed by eternity until we find ourselves at last in the home you have prepared for seekers and searchers who, in our seeking and searching, were hopelessly lost. Give us, we pray, the grace to surrender to being found. This we ask in the name above every name, the name of Jesus. Amen. Let it be. All right. So let's go ahead and get started this evening. Tonight's general theme is sort of revolving around the value of a good education. I was speaking with Joanne this morning before I told her she needed to just go to bed, and I wanted her to make sure she took the day. She and I were talking a little bit about some of the feedback that we have gotten over the last many months in asking our families what would be valuable to them to hear a little bit more about when it came to college. And it wasn't about scholarships, and it wasn't about writing college essays, and it wasn't about the application process. It was really about the value of a good education. And families having several questions about it. How do we measure what is the value of a good education? How families should think about the investment of time and resources when considering high education? What are the ways in which a liberal arts college education is still beneficial and important? And maybe what are some of the non-financial benefits in a student's future that comes from pursuing a liberal arts education. And so we've invited these panelists representing these different institutions to join us this evening to sort of talk about what it is that is valuable about a Christian liberal arts education. And we want to hear from you as well. So Allison is going to be managing the chat box, and it will be taking your questions probably in the Q&A box there instead of the chat box. But we'll go ahead and start with a couple of the questions that I have. I'll be moderating, but mostly you'll be hearing from the group here this evening. So we'll go ahead and throw out that first question, which is, I think, might take up most of our time. How do we measure the value of a good education?
Well, I guess I'll start if no one else is going to. And I'll start by being an ornery philosopher and saying that I don't think that's quite the right question to even be asking. And then I'll offer an answer. So the way I'm pushing back on this, which is actually in part an answer, is that we tend to think today, or many people think of education as a commodity. It's something that you pay for in order to get something out of. And if you're thinking of it in that sense, it makes perfect sense to say, how do I measure its value, right? What am I getting out of it? I think of the question, though, as sort of odd, in somewhat of the same way, and these aren't perfect analogies, as if we were to ask, how do you measure the quality of one's spiritual life? Or how do you measure the value of being married, or something like that, right? And I would say, well, yeah, we can talk about how to measure those things, but that's not quite the right way to look at, should I get married or not? How can I measure its value for me? There's more to it than that. So and we can delve into more of this. I don't want to go too deep, but I guess the first question I would say, or the first thing I would say is, I would challenge the idea that education is just a commodity. And then before we can answer the question, I would say, what do we understand as the purpose of education? And once we identify what we understand the purpose of education to be, then we're in a place to be able to start evaluating how we measure the value of a particular education. So those are some initial thoughts. Happy to add more.
Well, David, I think that's that's something I would support in a way of asking these questions. And maybe, I mean, the question is, why do we use two words that signal questions of value, or questions that are very modern, which is measurement itself? The assumption is that you can measure something like that. And the other is value, value being, a very modern term. And it typically is more, as you're pointing out, commercial, based on commodity, rather than virtue, which would have been, the term, what is the virtue of a good education? And then the question of, what is a good life that, you could tell that something has happened in terms of education, might be, the real impetus behind that question. Rather than, taking out a measurement stick and saying, hey, because I wanted to be not the first person to invoke Aristotle or Plato, but, my immediate thinking goes to, well, eudaimonia, what is the best life? I mean, because the best life would obviously include the best education. These are not, they're not inseparable. I mean, they're inseparable. And so I wondered if the question is, I read the question more as, okay, well, is the question assuming that the value is something about goodness or the goodness of life, and that the measurement of it is wondering how, I mean, I was, this kind of interpolating from the words is, how do we know? And when do we know that what we have done in the past, committed 4 years, has borne fruit in any way, has given us something that we would call goodness or a good life? But I think, I remember reading the ethics the first time and coming on that, well, you can't really know until you're dead or until you're close to dead. So that's not really helpful. Well, how do we know? Well, you had a good education because at your funeral, everything that we could talk about seemed to suggest that you're a good person and that education somehow, contributed to that. But so I wonder more practically if we could, if we could ask the question in your terms, like, okay, so what is the end of education and how can we reflect or stand back and look at it at different times of our lives, wondering, what value it presents in the future, what value it presents, in certain, periods of life, maybe. I don't know. I'm wondering if that's also, I would say, in agreement, David, is I want to get the question nuanced towards education as an end. What's its end? Which should be a good life. I hope, or learning to love the right things, something like that. And then, yeah, what are the things that we can take stock of at different times of our life that might help us say, oh, okay, well, maybe this would be a valuable thing. And I just, to more practically speaking, for instance, I'm thinking, most of the schools we're from, and I'm sure this is Dr. Matthew Smith's hope, is that most of the schools we're from place a lot of emphasis on community and the people you surround yourself with, your friends, and people who are going to be very, hopefully very involved in your life. And the value of that, in the short term is, well, you've got good friends who are going to, help you, do good things. But in the long term might be, well, is this where you might meet the appropriate person to marry? Is in a community like this one. And 20 years down the line, will I look and say, hey, I never would have met the kind of person I wanted to be with in a marriage and have a family with if I had not been part of this community. I know Shannon Valenzuela met her husband at the University of Dallas.
True.
And there's a lot of UD, there, but that's, it's a time of life when people are finding people, they're going to spend their lives with. So I wonder if that's a practical question where you could say, well, the value of this community or the worth of this community might be in surrounding myself with the right kind of people or people with whom I can have relationships that, aim at this larger good, at the end, toward this longer good that education aims at. And I'll stop right there. I've just already talked too much.
Can I, if I could piggyback off that, since you mentioned, I'm of two minds on this question, to be honest with you, because I'm in the process right now of filling out the FAFSA form for my senior. I have a son right now who is ready to graduate from the University of Dallas, and I have another one who is currently in his sophomore year and on the Rome semester right now, also at the University of Dallas. So as a parent who is looking at, the investment in an education of this kind, particularly at a private university, it's a lot. And so I completely understand the question from the perspective of, if it's an investment of this kind, of financial sacrifice for families of this kind, you kind of want to know that it is going for you're setting your child up for something in their life, for success of some kind, that they're going to have the things in their lives that they need, or that, that you're at least sending them on their way. And so I really do personally, I believe with all my heart that the two questions, we had a professor here at UD, Kathryn probably remembers, Dr. John Albus, who's passed away now. But he used to say that the two questions of a liberal education are, what is the nature of reality and how should a life be lived? Right. And that if your education can answer those two questions, that's getting you on your way, right? You're starting to understand that really those are the two most important things, the two most important questions. but knowing the answers to those questions, or like striving to live your life well, you want those things also to pay the bills, right? On a certain level. So I am torn between the very, very practical nature of the price tag and what we're talking about, an investment on the part of parents in an education of this kind, and wanting, like I said, to have some sort of way of measuring that there's a value there, that you could say, okay, that sacrifice that we're making, that is worth it somehow. Like if there's a way to reassure oneself. And then the very philosophical kind of side of this, which is exactly as my colleagues are suggesting, that there are these higher ends of education, which put it beyond the measurement of just a monetary value. So I am of two minds. I am struggling with both ends of that spectrum. And I think what I would say, if I might, is, so as a product of this kind of education, and then, you know, sending my children through this kind of education, that it really is about setting them up to do whatever it is that they're going to do in their lives, by giving them a certain set of skills that are maybe not immediately translatable into workplace skills, but they are the foundational skills that make it possible for them to do anything else they're going to do in their lives, right? Being good communicators, for example, right? Can they understand and communicate well? Can they learn what they need to know on the job, right? You're not going to get everything you need to know from, you know, at a university. You're going to have to learn how to learn. And I think that's one of the things that an education of the kind that we're describing, it equips you to be a lifelong learner. You just know how to learn. And then as well, I think there's a certain level, and I think Kathryn was getting towards this point as well, of character formation, that there is a certain level of formation of character to be a person who is directing yourself towards the good life, that you then are a person of personal integrity and responsibility, someone that people will depend on in the workplace, and will love to have, you know, in leadership roles, or in, you know, in very positive sorts of positions within the workplace. So just as sort of a way of maybe trying to get towards reconciling these two questions, because I know both weigh very heavily on all of us, that maybe we're looking at a certain set of skills that equip students that maybe not are immediately measurable in a monetary way, but which equip them to have the best success in their future endeavors. And I'd like to, yeah.
Well, I was just going to ask, it sounds like, and I'm kind of feeding a question here, but this idea between vocational training, which would have sort of like an immediate end, the very practical immediate end, versus a liberal arts education, which, as I think our panel is discussing, is probably a little bit less of a linear line from you're going to get this and you're going to get that as a result, get this education and get this end result. Matthew, how would you sort of help us contextualize the value and the difference of, because I know that at Hildegard College, you've got the blending of the liberal arts and the business together, which then kind of putting those two ideas together, it kind of achieves a little bit of both in some ways. But clarify and flesh this out a little bit for me with vocation versus liberal arts and the blend that you do at Hildegard. Sure. And I wholeheartedly agree with everything that my fellow panelists have said about liberal education. We at Hildegard College think of practical knowledge as a companion to liberal education, in as far as we want to lead students to what's true, through that help them recognize what's good, form convictions and desires for what's good, but then equip them to do something about it. And if you read, you know, Aristotle in the Politics, for instance, says that a liberal education is an education that makes a person fit for happiness, by which he means for a life of virtue. The key, I think, is blending, is that Aristotle
blends happiness, and we think of emotion when we think of happiness, but by that he means the good life at the same time. So how happiness can be found is by living the good life, which requires action and moral volitional thought. It's interesting. I was reading some of these comments in the chat as our panelists were speaking, and Michael's and Holly's, it's so expensive. I'm thinking of going $150,000 in the hole to fund this college thing. I have 3 kids, the oldest of which is a teenager. So I'm looking at the same scenarios. And when you're involved with founding a college, you do a lot of research into how people actually do measure college, or the business term they like to use for this is return on investment, the ROI, the return on investment, what makes it worth the cost. And it's funny, schools like to try to predict, or at least through their marketing, tell you that there are certain things that predict a better return on that $150,000, sometimes plus dollars that you spend on college, the major you choose, the school you choose. And really none of those things are significant predictors for a return on investment, both measured just monetarily, just financially, but also in terms of quality of life, or what eudaimonistic flourishing. There is one factor that we've found that actually does predict a strong return on investment financially, and also in terms of quality of life for college. And it really doesn't have anything to do directly with the characteristic of college. The one thing that can give a student a more likely chance of having a good return on their investment in college is the kind of student that they were in college. So if they're the kind of student that does their work, is held accountable to it, that makes lifelong friends, that lives in tight-knit communities and learns in community, that builds relationships of mentorship with their faculty, those are the kinds of students, good students. They go to class, they do their work, they invest themselves emotionally and intellectually in college, that have a good return on investment, even financially in college. And so when I look at the schools represented by the panelists here, I see colleges that require students to be the kinds of students that have that good return on investment already. So there is a way, I think, to answer in a utilitarian way the financial question: what makes the return on investment worth it? What's a good ROI for college? And I would encourage people to think about what kind of student you have to be to succeed at a given college. And for many, unfortunately, for many universities, you can't answer that question because they're multiversities. They're not universities. They can't answer the question, what will my child, or what will I as a student learn if I go to this school? What will I be taught? How will I be learned? It's completely up to chance who you study from. So there is, I think, a way to answer that ROI question, but it just directs us back to this point that's been made several times about a liberal education being one that prepares you for a life of happiness, that is, for a good life.
Yeah, Matthew, I'm glad you brought that up. I just would like to follow up, because it was something I was going to ask Shannon, Dr. Valenzuela. So one, you brought up the multiverse, right, or the multi-university, and the current model of education in most universities, and this kind of student that would actually benefit, or shows, but benefits both while they're in school and into their future. And I'm wondering, especially, I fell into classical education or liberal arts. I fell into it through English classes and philosophy classes, and did it very accidentally. Was not prepared by high school for it. And my parents certainly didn't, want to map that road out for me. So I do wonder about whether, and I think I was at a time, I won't date myself to it, but I was at a time when being at I went to as an undergraduate to the University of New Mexico, State University. You could study anything, but it seems to me at that time I was lucky enough to fall into or fall in love with liberal arts through regular coursework. And I'm wondering, is that still the case, do you think? Is that possible? Or is it the case that the research university is so divided that you really can't mostly find a place or find a love of learning, in most universities anymore? I don't really know. I mean, maybe that's a question for Kimberly, but is that the impetus for starting Hildegard? I mean, is that you can't find that?
I believe that, I mean, I've taught at a number of schools, including Christian universities that are large, and there are talented faculty and students take courses that transform their lives, like you did by studying literature and philosophy. One thing I would say is somebody interested in a good liberal arts education should look at the way that a university or college is teaching, not philosophy and literature, which is wonderful. It's what I study. But in many ways, for the liberal arts, it's low-hanging fruit. Instead, look at how the school teaches mathematics and the natural sciences. These are the most popular fields of study at universities, and they're the ones that really reveal what a school believes about the ends of education. Is it in the STEM model where it's all going towards the health sciences per se? It's all skipping the liberal, that is liberating, freeing aspect of education and jumping immediately to application? Or are they using the same pedagogical practices? Are they reading primary sources? When you're studying calculus, for instance, are you reading Leibniz and Newton, the people who invented it, and asking, why did calculus become a thing in the first place? Or what is physics? Let's read Aristotle's Physics, where he asks, what is nature? What is change? What is this thing we call physical causality? So for me, mathematics and natural science is the canary in the coal mine, so to speak, that signals to us what your education is really going to be like at that school. Not to say that you can't find little pockets here and there, but I passionately believe that a school has to, it puts its money where its mouth is. Comprehensively, are they subscribing to a view of liberal education, or are they allowing for a few kind of nuanced pockets of liberal arts here and there, but really subscribing to what amounts to a secular and utilitarian model for learning?
Okay, that's good.
Really, what did you say?
Yeah. Okay. There's been a lot here. So I love the discussion. I love the philosophical talk about, the value of an education and how we even begin to measure that. I was a homeschooling mom for many, many years. We lived on one income. My husband was the main breadwinner, and I stayed home and home educated my kids. And so from a very practical standpoint, I will tell you that we were sweating bullets over college education because we did not want our kids to go into debt with, this massive debt load that they were going to have to then say, like, how are they going to start a life? Can they get married right out of college? Will they ever be able to buy a house? How many years will they have to wait to have children if they come out with, tons and tons of debt? How many years are my husband and I going to have to work well past retirement age to help pay for, all of that? So all of these things were very practical concerns for us. I will tell you that all three of my kids have either graduated from or are currently in Christian liberal arts colleges, and they are doing so affordably. Okay. Now we've had to get creative at times. And so I just want to put out there that there is hope for people who want to do this affordably and do it on, when you haven't had many, many years of dual incomes to save up tons of money to do it. It is not the price tag that is usually on the school's website. So first of all, don't stress over that. There are ways to, to kind of work that out. So, if you would have said to me going in, like, oh, look at the school that my daughter's at, and it was going to be, about $200,000 for 4 years, there's no way we couldn't have done it. But she is there, and it's very affordable. And so I see them earning this fantastic education that is forming who they are, not just whether they are ready for careers, right? My oldest son actually got a philosophy degree, and so that is the butt of every joke that you ever see on the internet about all the things, like, he has a philosophy degree, he's in law school, so it kind of works for him. But the truth is, he went and worked for a year out of college, paid all of his own bills, was able to survive for a year, and saved money. So he went into law school with money saved up, and now we won't talk about what's happening in law school, but but that's on him at this point. We got into undergrad. So I will say that he came out with very marketable skills, with a philosophy degree. He can read well, he can write well, he can think well, he's very organized, he's great with interacting with people. Like, all of these skills were things that an employer valued and wanted to pay him for, even though it's the butt of every joke, he has a philosophy degree. Obviously, we don't think that. We love classical education, so I love the philosophers, but that is kind of that thing that gets pigeonholed, is like, oh, this is, my daughter is also very liberal arts based, and she's looking at internships. Part of it is what you do while you're in school. Are you building a resume that is going to be marketable? Because there is a fact, we want them to be independent when they graduate. We want them to have the skills to be able to put a roof over their head and food on the table at the end of the day. And my youngest one is actually a STEM major, but he's getting this great classical, liberal arts background in addition to STEM, because that was really important to him. And so, you can have both worlds. You can have practical, we can earn a living, and have a beautiful, robust liberal arts education that is actually shaping who they are as human beings and helping them to interact with the world and to live this good life. And so I'm, take it from someone who's just very practical, one income for many, many years. Like, it's doable. And we've gotten creative. The kids applied for a lot of scholarships. They worked very hard, but we did. I mean, we are making it work. They are making it work, and they're employable when they graduate.
Can I just piggyback on that?
Sure.
The very practical side of this, and I think it's important to recognize that there's no one right answer to this question, in the sense that, we classically homeschooled our children. We have for many years, including part of the time while I was a headmaster of classical Christian schools, and homeschoolers love to figure out the best way to do it. We don't just want any curriculum, we want the best curriculum, and we're very passionate about doing it the right way. And I would just say that I think it's valuable to step back and say, it's okay. There's more than one right answer here. Even just Kimberly, as you went through your children, right, the different paths that God had for each of them. I'm a staunch advocate for the value of classical liberal arts education, and here at Hillsdale we offer, that's what the whole college is about, and programs at the undergraduate and graduate level in classical education. I can try to articulate the value of that all day long, but there's also value in other types of education, and not everyone's educational path is different. And so I would just think, I'm thinking even back in the tradition of people like Hugh of St. Victor, who have a high value for the common arts, right? And these things that we don't often talk about within classical liberal arts education. The other couple of just practical points would be, so I was a philosophy major also, and so I echo what Kimberly said on that. And aside from all of the philosophical aspects of why a liberal arts education is valuable, throughout the tradition, and this is supported by current data also, it's just not an either or between education that is formative of a human being and education that is useful in a sort of narrow sense. I mean, the whole way back to Plato, Aristotle, I mean, on through the tradition, right? Quintilian addresses this question explicitly. Others, lots of people have done this within the tradition and said, like, look, a liberal arts education, all education is human being formation, right? So the question is, what kind of a human being are you being formed into? But it's not an either or proposition that if you get a liberal arts or, you know, a good classical liberal arts education, that then that's useless in practical things. And the statistics on philosophy majors are a great example of that, the butt of every joke. And yet look at earnings, even things as, you know, as utilitarian as salary earnings over decades, right? Philosophy majors actually do very well, better than other majors that come out with higher starting salaries. So I mean, even if you want to talk in those sort of crass monetary terms, don't assume that it's an either or. And the final point here would be the person who asked about advice for parents with a child that hasn't zeroed in on a specific discipline to study in college. Again, I would say both from a theoretical perspective and in terms of real sort of practical data, don't worry about it. It's fine. Something like 80% of all undergraduates change their major, most multiple times. And multiple studies put the percentage somewhere in the 73 or 72 to 75% range. Roughly 3/4 of students get a job that is completely unrelated to their undergraduate degree. So think about that for a second, right? As a culture, we're freaking out about going to the right college for the right major, which is, again, treating education as a commodity, where statistically in the United States, the vast majority of students are going to go into a job that's actually not related to their college major at all. So that's just what the statistics say. And to echo again what Kimberly said, if you know how to think, you know how to communicate, you know how to speak and write well, and you've been exposed to great ideas, you know how to learn, you have the tools of learning, those are things that are going to carry you much better than a very narrow technical education.
I'll just note that very quickly, these folks all work for, most of them work for colleges, obviously. And so that everything you're saying is fantastic. And I agree with everything you're saying. I work in the business world. I hire marketing people. I hire salespeople. I hire web developers. Every single person that works for us has at least a minor of philosophy or liberal arts, even if they got a web developing degree someplace, or, you know, whatever it might have been. Every single person who works at Classical Academic Press, I think almost to a person, whether they're my graphic designer, they lay out, they're an editor, whatever the role is, they got a liberal arts education, at least as a minor, they got a liberal arts degree. And that's because we want people who can communicate well, who can express themselves well, they can problem solve well, they can make recommendations, they can think both strategically and tactically. So just from a business perspective, these are the folks that I'm looking for when I'm hiring, and we're always hiring. So I always need good graduates. I need very good graduates, and the vast majority of the time I'm looking for folks that got a liberal arts education. Matthew, you were going to comment as well, I think, or at least you turned off your microphone.
Oh, I was just going to David's point about, you know, fewer than 25, something like 20% of college graduates have a career in the area of their major. But then you also mentioned that college students change their major. On average, it's more than twice per undergraduate student. I changed mine 3 times. And in reality, if you compound those two together, you get something like fewer than 8% of college graduates have a career in an area directly related to the major for which they chose a certain college. So I kind of want to back up David's point here, reinforce it and say, it's not, I mean, the problem is you'll say this to students, prospective students, if you're a student on here or a parent on here, most think that they're exceptions. But I just know I'm going to go into graphic design. I just know I'm going to go to med school or whatever they say. And you could say you're almost definitely not. You don't want to say that to them, but the reality is they're almost definitely not. And it's with that in mind, it can change our mindset when we think about the college decision, why to choose a school. All the more important, I think, not to choose it for, this is my opinion, not to choose it for a specific major that school offers, but rather for how that school approaches education overall, what it believes the purpose of learning is. If it's a Christian university or college, how they believe that end of learning ties into a greater end of all human moral activity in God's creation. Those, I think, are the more important questions to be asking, even though they're not the questions that lots of universities tell you when they market to you that you should be asking. They say, do you want to be a nurse? Do you want to be a physical therapist? Do you want to be in public policy? And there's a bit of a false myth, I think, to some of those recruiting strategies.
And Matthew, oh, sorry. Well,
Okay.
I keep going back to what you said earlier about, the success or the ROI is often measured by the kind of student the student is, both in college and the kind of person they, are formed during college and after. And I do wonder if, I think the worst investment is in a student who doesn't really know whether they want an education. If they see college as a way of either having just social time or having it easier or something like that, and just even being truthful to themselves, like, I'm going because all my classmates are going. I do think those hard questions, and I actually speak from experience. I spent a little bit of money on my stepdaughter, who it turned out really she just didn't fit in college. It wasn't for her. And so, yeah, the question of trade school, the question of 2-year programs where they're getting a specific, skill that they can test out. It might just be a question of their maturity. And I am happy to say that she now wants to go to college, but at the time she was going because all her friends were going, and she felt kind of dumb not going to college. But as soon as she got there, she didn't really know why she was there. So she couldn't become the student who was doing well, in college to then be successful outside of college. So we said after the first semester, no, this is not what, the investment's not paying off immediately. And maybe you need to step back and ask yourself, what do I want? What's good, in my life right now. So I think colleges should, the worst investment is a student who really just doesn't know and is flopping.
Yeah, and that bespeaks the importance of inspiration in college, because that's what motivates students to be the kind of student who will have a good return on their investment. And I'm assuming there are a lot of homeschool families on here. We speak with a lot of homeschool families, and one thing I admire about them is there's a kind of practical wisdom to the way that homeschool families tend to think. We don't believe in the system, and so we're going to kind of chart our own course through it. And there's a lot of, let's go to community college and then maybe transfer to a state school. We could do this for a fraction of the cost. And I'm all for lowering the cost of higher education. Our tuition is about a quarter of that of the average private university. But I think that the risk you run with going to community college or something is losing that inspiration, those things that are that motivate students to seek what is good and what is true. And so and I see this question about a gap year as well in the chat. Whether we like it or not, college has become a lot of things. It's not just for getting a job. It's not just for learning deep truths. Sometimes I would sit with freshmen in my office hours, previous universities, and they would say, I don't know what to major in. And I would say, well, what about asking the question, what is that thing that college can do better than another kind of institution? Is it getting you a job? Well, probably not, because you can go apprentice and that would be better. Is it to help you network with people? Well, no, because our world is just full of social networks now, even if they're vapid in some ways. Is it to make friends? Is it to grow spiritually? Well, isn't that what the church is for? So what is that thing that college does better than any other kind of institution? I do believe that the liberal arts is at the center of that answer, but I think we have to embrace the multivariate nature of what college is as a coming of age experience. We should not discount the role that inspiration plays in that experience.
That's a really good point. Tell me if you agree with this idea that there's a myth out there that what we want to do is produce a student so that they can get, they're sort of perfected for a specific job so that they can have a good life and a good career, that is a myth. But would you say that most professionals out there are looking for someone who they can turn into the perfect employee? They need the raw materials that are coming with a human being so that they can think well, be inspired by what the mission and vision of the organization is, that they can lean into the talents and become a great employee. Do they want the perfect employee coming out of college, or do you think that they want to be able to help mold and shape a person into their ideal employee? Is there a myth in there?
I think that I think there is no way you could possibly jump in on day one into a career, no matter what it is and no matter what your training has been, and know all the answers, right? There is always a process of learning and growing, which goes back to this point that I think we've all kind of tossed around in our own way, that the idea of a liberal education, that it teaches you how to learn and how to grow and how to how to learn. I mean, that's the best way to put it that I can think of, and that it equips you for that, because there will be no way to learn everything that you need to know just coming right out of the gate. And so in some ways I think I think, speaking from an employer standpoint, probably they would much rather have someone that is able to learn and pick up new skills quickly than just someone who is coming out of a program where they think they know everything already, So I think that's my thought on that.
Well, Shannon, both maybe you and David can speak to this. Do you think that part of what we think of as that training to teach oneself is because we have students push themselves to read and understand difficult things, that they have to really move and challenge the limits of their intellect there? Is that why we can kind of say, yeah, that's why we do it? What we're counting on, I should say.
I think part of it is that, and David certainly chime in. I think part of it is that they're challenged to stretch outside of what might be their comfort zone. I think in a program like the University of Dallas, we have a core curriculum here that's the first 2 years of a student's career here, where they're taking courses across the entire spread of the curriculum, including the STEM, sciences, including mathematics and things like that, languages and things. And so there's an idea that you are kind of prepared to stretch yourself into new areas that might not be the thing you came here for. You might be like, I'm a literature person. I don't want to take, biology. I don't want to take math. That's not my thing. But when you stretch yourself that way, you learn how to go into an unfamiliar situation and find the tools for success in that particular class. And maybe it's relationships with other students who are more naturally attuned to that, or maybe it's having a good rapport with the professor, just learning the kinds of skills that you need to succeed in that. I would love to hear David's perspective on this as well, of the kind of challenge that we offer to students. I think that's part of it, is helping them to stretch and grow that way.
Here at Hillsdale, we offer students a robust core also, right? So they all take literature and history and philosophy and science and math and fine arts, the whole thing. And I think that this goes again back to the, I think, false dichotomy that which is liberal, or that which is most conducive to eudaimonia, human flourishing, is not useful, right? That you have to pick one or the other. And there are lots of sort of philosophical or theoretical ways to make that point, but just as in terms of practical reality, to echo what Joelle and Shannon are saying, like, yes, employers are looking for these fundamental human skills, right? Look, employers are saying things like, I can teach you a computer coding language, but I can't teach you to think. I need people who know how to think, and then I can teach you the specific skills to this occupation, right? I need people who can write. I need people who know how to interact with other human beings and have empathy. A few years ago, Google published a study about the top 10 characteristics of longevity as Google employees. And it was remarkable how many in those top 10 were soft skills, right? They're the kinds of things that we are cultivating in classical liberal arts education. It's not technical capacity. And I think in an age which unfortunately we're seeing an ever decreasing rate of, basic logical thinking ability, or the ability to speak rhetorically persuasively, for example, these kinds of things, the value of the liberal arts even goes up. So again, yes, even in say, STEM fields or in other occupational fields as well. I mean, Joelle, you made this point earlier too, right? Like you're hiring philosophy, history, literature majors, these people who have this broad range of exposure to that which makes us human. Because whether you're doing advertising or marketing or law or working at the grocery store or running a construction company, you're interacting as a human being with other human beings. And so these fundamentally human skills and the cultivation of our humanity turns out to be quite valuable in the marketplace as well.
Well, we have about 15 minutes left, and there's a few questions that have come up in the Q&A. So, and I have one ending question. So I might just toss these questions to a few of you so we can all answer the last question. And I'm going to tell you what the last question is now, so you can be thinking about it. My last question that I'm going to want everybody to answer is, if you could pick one book that an incoming freshman should read the summer before their first semester in college, what would it be? So keep thinking about that in the back of your mind, and that'll be how we end. But Kimberly, I wanted to ask you this question, and then of course the rest of you can chime in as well. So a couple of questions that have come in through the Q&A box here have been, my kid thinks they are going to be missing out if they don't go to a big school, a big state school. There's things that a small liberal arts, a small classical, or a small Christian liberal arts school just can't give my kid. And I know that it's not true, but they don't know that it's not true. What do we say to the kids?
Oh, that's a tough one. Well, for one, I will say, as a parent of teens and adults, it's really hard to change their minds once they've firmly set them. And so I think that's very difficult to tread through, right? Because once they've kind of set that, I tend to ask my kids a lot of questions once they are in late teens and early adult years. And that's kind of how I approach, what are you looking for specifically? And so I probably that Socratic questioning kind of thing that I lived by all those years, we do that even as adults. What is it specifically you are looking for? What will you find at a large university? How are you going to find those things? And then I would take them to visit, not on an official day, like where it's like, let's go to the ball game and let's do it. Like, I would have them spend the night with other people in the dorms and see if that's really what they want. Because it may seem glamorous at the time, like they have this picture that's maybe coming from movies and, and from other things. And instead what they're going to experience is, at least in talking to my, my kids' friends and things, kind of a dearth of actually robust dialogue. That the thing that they have flourished with all through school is not there, because instead we're going to the kegger and, and these are the kinds of things. And if that is not, and hopefully that's not what your child wants, perhaps you need to tread that carefully if you think that is what the appeal is. But visit some of these places, have them stay in the dorms with other students and see what it is like. There is this robust, really fun, really social, great community happening at these smaller places. And many times it's much, much easier to get plugged in, because when you go to one of these great big schools, you are a number. And you are often rooming with people who have nothing in common with you. And I read time and time again of students who are just lost and they are lonely and they are searching, and this is not what they thought it was going to be. This is not what the movies make it out to be. And so visit, spend time with people, actually go and plug in, because I think most of the time you will find that it is much easier to actually form those networks and any kind of meaningful friendship if they're doing it at a smaller place that really fosters that community. And you go back to like John Henry Newman and the idea of a university, right? It's not even what they're being taught all the time. A lot of what is happening is the discussion. Well, and if you're ripping away from them the stuff that is really valuable, the discussion that is valuable, and instead it's about parties or then they're probably going to miss out on a lot of what the value of that education should be.
Does anybody else have an angle for talking to the kids? Because I have other questions if you feel like Kimberly kind of covered it well. Any other ways to kind of talk to the kids about their ideas?
I'll just jump in and piggyback on that as a mom also who's helping kids navigate that. Is that a lot of it just depends. I love the idea of just asking them what it is that they really want, or what it is that they're afraid they're going to miss out on, and why they're afraid of that. And so I think that's such a great conversation opener. So I just encourage that conversation of like, what is it that they're afraid that they're going to miss out on, and is there something else that would help them feel like they're not missing out on that so much. If there was another school that offered something, that felt like it would satisfy that need, would that help? And then I love the suggestion too that she made about visiting the schools, not on an official visit day. Like go when you can just walk around and like, see what the students actually do when there's not official tours running and things like that. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Anyone else? All right, let's just speak very quickly to extracurricular activities and the fully formed person, right? The idea of a paideia education, the fully formed person, because we've been talking about liberal arts, but there's more than just, and I think some folks maybe listening are thinking that you're only speaking about philosophy, history, literature, the grammar, logic, and rhetoric of the liberal arts kinds of things, and they might not think that we're talking about any of the quadrivium arts, any of the mathematics, any of the sciences, any of the economics, or music, or gymnastics, or any of those kinds of things. So I'd love it if we could maybe talk just a little bit about what we mean by liberal arts, so that we can make sure that we're contextualizing that correctly for the listeners. Matthew, would you be able to sort of just give us a little bit of a context for what it is what you mean by liberal arts when you're talking about liberal arts?
Yeah, sure. So the liberal arts traditionally, as probably many people on here are aware of, refer to 7 liberal arts: grammar, logic, rhetoric, the trivium, and then astronomy, music, arithmetic, and geometry, the quadrivium or the quadrivial arts. And in many in many minds of the thinkers who I think generated this idea of the liberal arts, the quadrivial arts that we traditionally associate with the sciences are kind of the first arts. We tend to organize our schools, our K through 12 schools, in different ways, but it is through studying nature, beginning with arithmetic and then geometry, and then finally to music and astronomy, that we elevate our minds to the higher things of philosophy and theology. And so as disciplines, philosophy and theology were products of studying the quadrivium, these quadrivial arts historically. So the way we approach the liberal arts at Hildegard College is in a polymathic way. So our namesake Hildegard was a polymath, not an expert in one thing, but proficient in many things. And we aim to give students this approach to the liberal arts that is not what we think of when we think of a liberal arts college. When I think of a liberal arts college, I think of a wacky little school where you're taking a class in finger painting and puppetry and robotics or something like that, right? Sometimes we just think of the arts, really, as in literature and drama. But that's, in fact, I think most of the traditional liberal arts are more technical in nature, not applied in the way that we think of it that way, but are using that side of the brain a little bit more than we typically imagine them these days.
Anybody want to add anything to the context for liberal arts? David, would you like to flesh anything out?
I guess just one other thing I would add, that what Matthew said is exactly right. Is that Aristotle talks about how that it's also the telos, or the goal for which you're doing it. So the same activity or the same discipline area of study can be considered liberal or not, depending on why you're doing it. And so this just goes back to the issue again, that education is about the formation of human beings. And to riff off of what Matt just said, the reason why the quadrivium, or those quadrivial arts, were so highly valued across the centuries is because of the way that they shaped the human mind and directed the human soul, right? So obviously there's some practical uses as well, if you want to know how to build bridges or buildings that don't fall down. But that's not the first or the primary reason why they're valuable. They were valued and have been valued because of the way that they shape the human being and enable us to investigate the world around us. So yeah, I think that's those are very valuable. And again, the question is, why are you studying this? Arthur Holmes wrote in his book, The Idea of a Christian College. I just think he summed up so much so succinctly. He said, the question to ask of education is not what can I do with it, but what is it doing to me as a person? Education is, he goes on to say, education is about the formation of persons, Christian education about the formation of Christian persons. So I just think that reframes, again, this question of what is education for?
Mm-hmm. All right. So we'll end with the question. So I'd like you to identify the book that you think all incoming freshmen should read the summer prior to their first semester, and maybe just a very quick why, an explanation for why. So Kathryn, let's start with you.
Oh gosh. Well,
you're welcome.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to defend my choice, I guess. It doesn't sound like a exciting book, but currently I think I'm of mind to assign or to have all students read Crime and Punishment before going to college. Partly is I think that we haven't changed much from, or they haven't changed much from the kind of person that the protagonist in the novel is, Raskolnikov, and he goes through much of the thinking that modern man kind of goes through. And I think it's very instructive. I actually have a student, I've taught it this semester, so that's kind of in the forefront. But that's my choice. So I don't want to take up much time.
Very good. Thank you. Kimberly, what about you? What do you think?
I'm going to go probably a little different direction than what many of our other panelists will say. And it's, I have always encouraged my kids, and, we did kind of that last little bit before they went to college. We picked something that I thought spoke to really where they were spiritually, or something that they really needed. And so it might be something like a Francis Schaeffer book, or something worldview focused. But another one that I love, that I had all of my kids read, is a book by Kevin DeYoung called Just Do Something. And I think that as we talk about like how kids are struggling about, what am I going to major in? And I'm making all these major decisions. This is a really short book that talks about like just doing God's will in your life, just plunge in and do it. And, and follow his revealed will. And I find that just so encouraging. And so I had all of my kids read it before they went to college, because it just gave them assurance that if they were living within the revealed will, just keep moving forward. And, and that was going to be great. It didn't have to be this, grand vision and knowing exactly what it is. And I think it just gave them assurance that what they were doing was the right thing.
Very good. Thank you. Matthew, what about you?
The book that I would give to every incoming college freshman across the U.S. would be C.S. Lewis's The Abolition of Man.
That's what I was going to pick.
Well, I already took it. You have to choose something else. We at Hildegard talk about 3 cultural myths of industrialism, consumerism, and individualism. And I'm reminded of this quotation, famous quotation from the Abolition of Man, that we make men without chests and then expect from them virtue and enterprise. And I believe that there needs to be, as a starting point, an understanding of the thing for which we're doing it, the thing for which we're studying and working and building friendships. What are these things for? And this is, to David's point, this is the difference between what makes any art, call it politics, can be a common art or servile art or a liberal art. It's a liberal art first and foremost when you are doing it for something, when you have an idea of what the good society is for. So The Abolition of Man, C.S. Lewis.
Great. Shannon, what about you?
So I would have students read A Tale of Two Cities by Dickens, in part because I taught this book to 10th graders when I was teaching in a classical school, and it was my first read when I taught it, and it made such a profound impact on me because of the transformation and the growth of the hero. And I think that a lot of students maybe are starting out from a place where maybe they're not sure they could ever do a heroic thing, or maybe they're not sure how they would ever find the courage to do something like that in their life, or why they would even be motivated to do something like that. And I think watching Sydney Carton's transformation is super inspiring. So that's my pick.
I love it. David, what about you?
Well, somebody mentioned Range in the chat, which I was actually thinking of. David Epstein's book, it would be good. But I'm actually going to I'm going to pick an anthology and defend that as not cheating, because you said book, which I'm defining as a bound tome. So therefore this counts. So I would have every incoming freshman read the book, The Great Tradition, edited by Richard Gamble, colleague here at Hillsdale College in the history department. The Great Tradition, and the subtitle is Classic Readings on What It Means to Be an Educated Human Being. And so this is an anthology of selections throughout the tradition. And even if incoming students could read half of it, or even a third of it, I think it would raise many of the questions that we've been discussing tonight, and really help them to think about, what is this education thing I'm getting ready to do or have been doing all about, and how should I think about it? So I think that's a great book for students and for parents alike.
I agree. That is another good one. Well, we are right at time, so we'll go ahead and end for now. Thank you all for joining us, and you'll be getting a recording of this session as well. All registered participants will. So thank you to our panelists for spending some time with us this evening. I know I really enjoyed our conversation, and I'm sure everyone else did too. And if I don't see all of you again, have a wonderful Christmas and a blessed New Year. All right, take care, everyone. Have a great evening. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Blessings, everyone.
Good night.